Hi, this is E.T., and this is Jim Thorpe, arguably the greatest athlete of the 20th century, maybe ever. Thorpe excelled in many sports, including college and professional football, baseball, and various track and field events. Thorpe was born in 1888 on the Sauk and Fox Indian Reservation. He was said to be a direct descendant of Chief Black Hawk, who engaged in battles with Illinois militia back in the 19th century. One of those militia included young Abraham Lincoln. After several brutal years in government-run schools, during which half of his 11 siblings died, including his twin brother Charles, Thorpe found guidance at Pennsylvania's Carlisle Indian School, where Coach Glenn "Pop" Warner, himself pretty famous, in 1904 witnessed Jim, who was wearing street clothes at the time, high jump, either 5'9" or 6 feet, depending on who you read. It doesn't matter, either one bested the high school high jump record. Warner placed Jim on Carlisle's track and football teams, where, to put it mildly, he excelled. In 1909, Thorpe left the school for a few months to play for a new minor league baseball organization, and he was paid money, but unlike other so-called amateur players, Thorpe used his own name. That would come back to bite him. In 1911, Jim Thorpe, back at Carlisle, led the football team to an 11-1 record, and himself qualified for the U.S. Olympic team, and he represented the United States at the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm. He earned 2 gold medals in the pentathlon and decathlon. By the way, his totals in the latter were not exceeded for many years. Even the great Bob Mathias, decades later, could not top some of Thorpe's record times. And the top decathlon competitor ever did recently top Thorpe's 1,500-meter run record, but only by 1 second. Oh, did I mention Jim had to compete wearing mismatched shoes? Sweden's King Gustav said to Thorpe, "Sir, you are the greatest athlete in the world." The taciturn Jim replied, "Thanks, King." Now world-famous Jim Thorpe, he was given a New York City ticker tape parade, was back at Carlisle, and he became a target for any opposing football team hoping to score against this sports polymath. That included the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, which met Carlisle in November of 1912. In that game, 2 West Point linebackers executed maneuvers long in planning, intended to put the Olympic star on the disabled list. Early in the game, they both slammed into Jim, and they rattled him quite a bit. He injured his shoulder. But during the second attack, Thorpe swerved, and both cadet linebackers collided and were out of the game. One of those linebackers earned notoriety later during World War II as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and in 1952 when he was elected President of the United States. This man was Dwight David Eisenhower. Oh, by the way, Carlisle won the game 27-6, and Jim Thorpe ran for 2 touchdowns and kicked 3 goals. Months later, in January of 1913, Thorpe's so-called professionalism, you remember he took a small baseball salary, was exposed, the result being he was stripped of his Olympic medals, which A, was for many an injustice, perhaps inspired by factors other than the ostensible charge, and B, did little to detract from Thorpe's popularity. In the next decade, Jim started a family, something not a subject here. He played professional football, excelling at running, passing, tackling, kicking. He averaged, by the way, 60-yard punts. And he continued into the 20s as a player coach. Jim Thorpe was also the first commissioner for the NFL. But by the end of the decade, Jim Thorpe's fame, despite his unequaled Olympic and professional achievements in many sports, was eclipsed by new champions and stars of film since 1928, accompanied by sound, and soon economic crisis. The 1929 stock market crash, followed by a decade-long depression, and then World War II. During this period, up to his 1953 death, Jim Thorpe earned money as a laborer, a janitor, a merchant seaman, a fitness instructor for the Chicago Recreational Department, and giving the occasional motivational speech for troubled youth. He also appeared in films that, for inexplicable reasons, seldom recognized his small on-screen appearances, although later Jesse Owens, Jack Dempsey, Bob Mathias, Max Baer, even Max Baer's son, and many other sports champions pulled in much money and fame from radio, film, and television work during their post-sports careers. Jim was listed as a writer for the 1951 movie entitled Jim Thorpe All-American. It starred Burt Lancaster, but Jim received $0 for his help. In the early 1950s, a rediscovered Jim Thorpe was voted by the Associated Press as the greatest football player and overall athlete of the first half of the 20th century, beating out Jack Dempsey, Babe Ruth, and Jesse Owens. He was also inducted into the College and Professional Football Halls of Fame. Jim Thorpe died not long after, in 1952. He was 64. He died of heart failure. Almost 3 decades later, the IOC would reinstate the late Jim Thorpe and recognize him as they put it, co-champion of the 1912 Olympic events, but none of his record feats are yet reinstated. Although President Nixon proclaimed April 16, 1973 as Jim Thorpe Day, and various stamps, coins, and trophies appear as testimony of his great athletic prowess and other contributions to sports generally. Did Jim Thorpe seethe over being deprived of official recognition for so many decades? Well, no, not really. Several times he said that he competed for the love of the game, that other things were more important. Here are Jim's words. "I am no more proud of my career as an athlete than I am of the fact that I am a direct descendant of that noble warrior." He was talking about Chief Black Hawk. So the question arises, was Jim Thorpe the greatest overall athlete of the 20th, maybe any century? My guess is, without recent advances such as the rubber poles, the designer running shoes, the performance-enhancing drugs, including anabolic steroids, without the various protective gear and specialized strength and other coaches and new techniques that no other athlete, before or since, competing in as many events as did Jim, could even approach his achievements in track and field, on the gridiron, playing baseball, competing in so many events, at so many positions, with so primitive equipment as did Jim Thorpe, the greatest overall athlete ever. This is E.T. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And please do subscribe to this channel and hit that like button.